Power is rarely gentle. It does not arrive dressed in white robes, carrying olive branches, whispering lullabies about love. Power comes with boots, with teeth, with iron hands disguised as velvet gloves. And yet, we live in a world drunk on the fantasy that love, pure, tender, unconditional love, is the highest force that binds people together. A comforting illusion, a sweet poison we pour into our veins to dull the edges of reality. But Niccolò Machiavelli, the man whose very name has become synonymous with manipulation and ruthlessness, tore through that illusion with a single, unforgiving observation. It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. That phrase, repeated across centuries, has been misunderstood by romantics and tyrants alike. Some wield it as a blunt weapon, others dismiss it as cynical dogma. But if you listen carefully, you'll notice the echo of a truth most people are too cowardly to admit. Love is fleeting, fear is permanent. Love is fragile, fear is reliable. And when survival is at stake, reliability is worth more than fragility. Machiavelli lived in a time when political power was not a sanitized stage of debates and handshakes. It was blood-soaked streets, shifting alliances, daggers hidden under cloaks. Leaders who trusted too much in love, who thought their popularity would shield them, quickly learned that affection evaporates under pressure. A famine comes, a war breaks out, a scandal erupts, and suddenly the same crowds who adored you yesterday are demanding your execution today. Love is a fair-weather ally. Fear is the bodyguard that never sleeps. But let us pause. Why does this observation still disturb us so deeply today? Because we want to believe we are different. We want to believe modern humanity has transcended the primal mechanics of control, that our societies are guided by empathy, compassion, love. And yet, if you scrape the polished surface of politics, business, even personal relationships, you'll see the skeletal framework of fear holding everything together. Governments rely on fear of punishment to enforce law. Employers rely on fear of unemployment to maintain productivity. Even in love itself, fear of loss, fear of betrayal, fear of loneliness keeps the bond intact as much as affection does. Fear is the hidden architect behind every fragile structure we mistake for love. Think about it. If tomorrow all fear evaporated, would laws still matter? Would morality still hold? If you knew there were no consequences, no punishment, no rejection, no death, how many promises would you keep? How many commitments would survive the raw honesty of that freedom? This is why Machiavelli's statement is not just political advice, but a brutal diagnosis of human nature. He was not telling princes to be monsters for the sake of cruelty. He was telling them that human beings, by their very wiring, are unfaithful to love but chained by fear. And this is the paradox. We publicly praise love, we chant it in songs, we canonize it in movies, we make it the currency of self-help gurus. But in private, in the darkest chambers of our psyche, we bow to fear. We check our phones not because we love them, but because we fear missing out. We obey traffic lights not out of love for order, but fear of death. We work overtime not because we love our boss, but because we fear failure, poverty, insignificance. Fear fuels the engines of daily life silently, invisibly, relentlessly. Machiavelli did not invent this law of power. He merely stripped away the illusions, and that act of stripping terrifies us. Because once you admit that fear works better than love, you are forced to reconsider your entire moral framework. You are forced to admit that perhaps you yourself are not motivated by noble ideals, but by primitive anxieties. And if that is true, then what is left of your freedom? Now you might feel the urge to resist this thought, to argue, to protest. You want to believe in love, in kindness, in some higher principle. And maybe you're right. Maybe your life has proven that love can indeed endure where fear fades. But pause for a moment. Do you truly believe that love alone keeps the world spinning? Or do you suspect, deep down, that beneath every declaration of love lies the shadow of fear, shaping it, strengthening it, making it real. That tension between the dream of love and the reliability of fear is precisely where the lesson lies. Machiavelli was not asking you to abandon love, but to understand its weakness, to know that if you depend only on being loved, you are building your empire on sand. But if you wield fear carefully, strategically, without letting it rot into cruelty, then you build on stone. And stone, unlike sand, does not wash away with the tide of public opinion. This is why even today, centuries later, his advice lingers like a curse, because it forces us to confront the harsh geometry of control. Every ruler, every CEO, every parent, every lover faces the same calculation. Is it safer to be loved or to be feared? And though most will never admit it out loud, their actions betray the truth. They choose fear. They may sprinkle it with kindness, dress it with smiles, perfume it with affection, but underneath, it is fear that binds the contract. Here's the unsettling question. If you were given power, real power, would you dare test which one holds better? Would you gamble on love, or would you rely on fear? Think about it, because even as you watch this video, even as you listen to my words, part of you feels the pull of this dark thought. And maybe that's why you haven't clicked away yet, because you know I'm not feeding you sugary platitudes. I'm giving you the bitter medicine of reality. And if you can stomach it, if you can endure it, then maybe you're the kind of mind that belongs here. Maybe you're the kind of thinker who doesn't flinch from the shadows. That is why I invite you to stay, to join the strange fellowship of those who prefer truth to comfort. Subscribe if you want to walk further into these corridors of thought. Share this with someone who still clings to illusions of love, and watch how they react when confronted with Machiavelli's knife. Comment below. Tell me honestly, do you believe fear is stronger than love? Or are you still holding the line for affection, loyalty, tenderness? Your answer reveals more about you than you might like to admit. And remember, this is only the beginning. Fear versus love is not just a quote from a dusty political treatise. It is the foundation of how societies rise and collapse, how leaders endure or fall, how you yourself navigate the labyrinth of existence. And the deeper we go, the more disturbing it will become. So if you think you can handle it, stay with me. The second part of this exploration will peel back even more layers, until the very structure of your beliefs begins to crack. Because here's the darkest truth of all. Machiavelli was not simply writing for princes, he was writing for you. Fear is not simply a weapon of tyrants. It is a currency, a silent economy that circulates in every interaction you've ever had. The sooner you see it, the sooner you understand how power really moves in this world. But most people don't want to see it. They want to believe that every relationship is a sacred contract of trust, that every leader can hold on to love like a lantern guiding them through chaos. They want to believe humanity is kinder than it is. But reality is patient. Reality waits for the moment when love falters, and then it strikes with the iron hand of fear. Machiavelli did not say that fear is beautiful. He did not say it makes the world better, or fair, or peaceful. He said it works. That word, works, is the key. Love may inspire, love may uplift, but fear gets results. If you doubt this, test it in your own life. Have you ever been loved so deeply that you changed your behavior? Maybe. But have you ever been afraid? Afraid of losing your job, afraid of humiliation, afraid of pain, and instantly, without hesitation, adjusted your actions? That is the brutal efficiency of fear. It cuts through hesitation. It eliminates debate. It forces compliance. This is why, in the logic of power, fear becomes the bedrock. It is not about cruelty. It is about certainty. Love depends on the moods of others, but fear is rooted in your own calculation of risk. You can fall out of love with someone overnight, But you will not suddenly stop fearing the consequences of betrayal. Fear endures where love withers. Yet there is a danger in misusing this insight. Many who read Machiavelli think his lesson is a license for brutality. They confuse fear with hatred, intimidation with sadism. But he was careful, almost surgical, in how he defined the balance. To be feared is not the same as being hated. Hatred is volatile. It burns too brightly and consumes itself. A ruler who inspires hatred plants the seeds of rebellion. But a ruler who inspires just enough fear, a fear mixed with respect, with inevitability, creates stability. He understood the delicate art of fear, strong enough to command loyalty, not so strong as to provoke vengeance. Think about modern leaders, bosses, even teachers. The ones who rely only on being loved end up disrespected, taken advantage of, ignored when difficult decisions must be made. The ones who lean too heavily into cruelty, who become tyrants, eventually provoke revolt. But the ones who walk the narrow path of fear, quiet, disciplined, restrained, are the ones who maintain control the longest. Their enemies hesitate, their allies obey, their subjects comply, and the illusion of order remains intact. This is not just politics. This is personal. How many times in your life have you let someone walk over you because you wanted to be loved? How many times have you betrayed yourself because you feared losing affection? That is the quiet tragedy of those who worship love above all else. They become victims of their own softness. They hand over their power, hoping for loyalty, and discover that loyalty is conditional. They learn too late that people love you only until it is inconvenient. And yet, here is the uncomfortable mirror. Have you ever, even subtly, used fear yourself? A silent withdrawal of affection to make someone worry. A sharp tone of voice to remind someone of your boundaries. An intentional pause, letting silence hang heavy in the air until the other person feels the weight of your displeasure. You see, fear is not only the tool of rulers, it is the language of survival. It is woven into every dynamic where control matters, whether you admit it or not. Machiavelli's genius was not in inventing this principle, but in revealing it. He wrote for princes, but he was describing humanity itself. And humanity, no matter how much it sings about love, is built on fear. Fear of death, fear of exile, fear of shame, fear of insignificance. These primal engines have not changed in 500 years, nor will they change in 5,000. This is why, when you hear the phrase "better to be feared than loved," you should not think only of kings and soldiers. You should think of your own life. The moments you tried to be everyone's friend, only to be betrayed. The times you placed love above respect and discovered that without respect, love becomes mockery. Respect is built on fear. Fear of crossing your boundaries, fear of underestimating you, fear of losing you. And without that foundation, love is not devotion, it is convenience. So let me ask you directly, do you want to be convenient or do you want to be respected? Do you want to build your life on the fragile threads of affection or on the steel cables of fear? Because here's the truth. When you stop trying to be loved, when you begin to cultivate the aura of someone who cannot be trifled with, you change the very geometry of your relationships. People step carefully. They choose their words more wisely. They do not take you for granted. That is the silent respect Machiavelli was pointing to. And yet, there is still that lingering discomfort, isn't there? The voice in your head whispering, "But isn't love the higher path? Isn't love what makes life worth living?" And perhaps it is. But even love, real love, requires fear to hold it together. A partner stays faithful not just because they adore you, but because they fear losing you. A friend stays loyal not just because they enjoy your company, but because they fear betraying your trust. Love without fear is fragile. Fear without love is brutal. The balance is everything. This is why the question is not whether fear is better than love in some abstract moral sense. The question is, which one guarantees stability? Which one guarantees survival? And the answer, whether you like it or not, is fear. Machiavelli was not teaching morality, he was teaching survival. He was saying, if you must choose between being adored and being respected, choose respect. Because respect endures, respect protects, respect survives storms that love cannot. And here is where it gets personal again. How much of your life is wasted trying to win love when you could be cultivating respect? How much of your energy is wasted trying to be pleasing, charming, agreeable, when you could be radiating strength? What would happen if you stopped caring about being loved and started caring about being respected? How would your relationships, your career, your entire existence change? Think about that question deeply. Comment your thoughts below if you dare, because the answer will expose not only your philosophy, but the very architecture of your soul. And if this exploration is shaking something inside you, if you feel both disturbed and strangely liberated, then you are exactly where you need to be. Subscribe, not because I ask sweetly, but because you know you crave more of this unsettling clarity. Share this with someone who still believes love is enough, and watch them flinch. We are not done yet. We've peeled back the first layer, the fragility of love, the reliability of fear. But there is a darker layer still, one most people never dare to confront. What happens when fear itself becomes unstable? What happens when fear no longer binds, but fractures? When the very foundation Machiavelli relied on begins to corrode? That is where we are heading next. And trust me, it is not a place for the faint of heart. Because in the end, the real question is not whether it is better to be feared than loved. The real question is, who do you become when you are no longer afraid of anything at all? We have seen why love crumbles under pressure and why fear endures like stone. But here's the abyss Machiavelli could not fully map. What happens when fear itself dissolves? When those you wish to control are no longer bound by consequences? When death no longer terrifies, when punishment no longer restrains, when exile, shame, suffering, none of it matters anymore? That is the horizon of power's collapse. Because fear is powerful, but it is not infinite. It rules only as long as the mind believes there is something left to lose. This is the silent terror of every ruler, every tyrant, every manipulator. They can keep people in line as long as people cling to survival, reputation, comfort. But what if the people stop clinging? What if a person, or worse, a mass of people, decide that nothing matters? That is when fear loses its teeth. The suicide bomber, the revolutionary, the one who laughs in the face of torture, they terrify rulers not because they are violent, but because they are free of fear. And once fear evaporates, no chain can hold. Think of history. Regimes built entirely on fear eventually collapse, not because fear fails at first, but because it corrodes. It pushes too far. It bleeds respect into hatred. It transforms obedience into rebellion. Machiavelli understood this danger. He warned against cruelty that ignites resentment. But rulers rarely listen. They push harder, demanding more fear, until they discover the paradox. The more fear you demand, the more fragile your throne becomes. Fear is strong, but it is brittle. It must be tempered with calculation, with limits, with the appearance of justice. And here is where we turn the mirror back on you. Your life is ruled by fear, yes, but what happens when your fears vanish? Imagine no longer fearing rejection, no longer fearing failure, no longer fearing loneliness. What would you do differently? How much of your behavior, your decisions, your compromises are merely the choreography of fear? If you strip them away, what remains of you? Do you even know who you are without the scaffolding of fear? This is the forbidden thought. Freedom from fear is not always salvation. It is dangerous, intoxicating, destabilizing. Without fear, morality loses its anchor. If you truly feared nothing, not the police, not your neighbors, not your conscience, what laws would you break? What relationships would you discard? What darkness would you unleash? Fear keeps the monster inside you on a leash. Without it, the leash snaps. And what steps out may not be a hero, but a beast. Machiavelli hinted at this but never said it outright. Societies need fear because without it, the illusions that hold civilization together collapse. Laws are not upheld by love of justice, but by fear of punishment. Economies are not built on love of work, but on fear of hunger. Families are not bound by pure affection, but by fear of abandonment. Strip away fear, and the world you know disintegrates. And yet, at the same time, the only path to true individual freedom is the annihilation of fear. Do you see the paradox? Fear enslaves, but it also stabilizes. To transcend fear is to risk chaos. To remain bound by fear is to remain trapped. This is why most people never even attempt to escape fear. It terrifies them more than fear itself. They prefer the prison of safety to the void of freedom. They cling to rules, to gods, to governments, to relationships, not because they are full of love, but because they cannot bear the silence of standing alone without fear as a guide. They are afraid of life without fear, afraid of the abyss. But maybe you are different. Maybe you can look at that abyss and not tremble. Maybe you can imagine a life where love is fragile, fear is unreliable, and yet you walk forward anyway. Because here is the final, most unsettling truth. Machiavelli was right in his time, but his wisdom is not the end of the story. Fear works better than love, but beyond fear lies something rarer, something most will never taste. Beyond fear lies freedom. Freedom is not comfort. It is not happiness. It is not peace. It is the terrifying realization that you no longer need to be loved nor feared, that you answer to nothing outside yourself, that no one controls you with threats or bribes. It is power, yes, but it is also isolation, because most people cannot join you there. They will cling to love, they will cling to fear, but they will never step into the void where both collapse. If you step there, you walk alone. And so you face a choice. Will you cling to love, fragile but beautiful? Will you embrace fear, reliable but heavy? Or will you risk it all, cast both aside, and discover what waits when fear no longer governs you? That is the dark path. That is the path Machiavelli hinted at, but never fully explored. And it is the path I challenge you to consider. As you let these words sink in, remember, most people will turn away. They will dismiss this as too dark, too cynical, too unsettling. They will retreat to their illusions, where love reigns in fairy tales and fear is only for villains. But not you. You are still here. You are listening, which means you already know the illusions are lies. You already feel the pull of the truth. So I ask you, are you willing to confront it fully? Are you willing to see fear for what it is, to see love for what it isn't, and to see yourself without either? If so, then stay. Subscribe, not because I beg you, but because you recognize this is where your mind belongs. Comment below what you fear most, and ask yourself whether that fear is the chain that defines you or the fire that might one day set you free. Share this with someone who needs to be shaken awake, who still clings to illusions. Watch their reaction. Watch whether they recoil or awaken. Because Machiavelli gave us a choice, hidden in plain sight: rule with fear or perish in love. But beyond his words lies the final challenge. Do you dare to live without either? Do you dare to live in the silence after fear? That silence is waiting. Most will never hear it. But if you are still listening, if you are still here, then perhaps it is calling you.